Now, for more on the Shenzhou-13 space mission, let's turn to Keith Cowing. He's a former rocket scientist and editor of SpaceRef.com. So, Keith, some exciting news to start this hour. First, your thoughts on what we are hearing, this docking taking place just a few moments ago.
Well, it's not a surprise that it happened without any event. I mean, it's a straightforward process. It does take a while. And although you hear people saying, well, they're traveling at 17,500 miles an hour, that is true, but the spacecraft are in slightly different orbits, so you have to get it just right. So it takes a while, and sometimes it's like watching grass grow.
So walk us through what will be happening. You said this could take a long time. How long do you think that could take? And then let's talk about what happens once that happens as these taikonauts try to make their way inside the space station.
Well, after the docking has happened, which has happened now, the spacecraft puts some probes in, they lock in, they pull it tighter in so that there's a very strong seal. Then they have to check to make sure that there's no leaks in their spacecraft, that there's no leaks in the space station, the communication is in place and so forth. They have to do, checks with their spacesuits and everything. So that takes a while. It probably could take the better part of several hours. And then they make sure that the environment inside the space station is safe for them, and then they open the hatch. So it's a lot of checklists. You'll see them, if you see video, they'll be looking at their iPads saying, yeah, we've done that, we've done that. So it's a lot of checklists mostly.
Right. It's not a matter of just getting in and getting right to work. Let's talk about this latest mission. We know the taikonauts are spending double the amount of time at the station than their predecessors, 6 months, and then that will soon become the norm.
Well, and it's following a practice that how you build space stations. When America put Skylab up, our first mission was 28 days, and there was one for 56 and 84. The Russians with Salyut, and then the International Space Station. You start with one period of time, you make sure everything works. You double it, you triple it, and I would expect that before very long, China will be talking about one-year space missions on board the space station.
We want to mention that there is a female crew member, Wang Yaping. She has been into space before, but this is the first time that she will actually live inside the space station. How significant is this?
Well, there's more room to begin with, and given that she's going to be up there for a while, that becomes very important. But because it's bigger, that means she has a lot more to do than just sort of stay in the spacecraft. And as we've learned, she's going to be doing some EVAs, and that's also part of the normal way that you build a space station. You sort of dock these pieces together, and then you have to connect the cables, and to do that, you have to go outside. So she's probably going to get to do one of everything that you would do while living on a space station.
Also, some special experiments geared toward women, we understand, as well as talking to students, some pretty exciting stuff. As we hear more and get more information about what's taking place, again, we're trying to work on getting that video back as soon as possible. Talk to us briefly about China's space ambitions. We know that this has been going on at quite a clip. This has been scheduled, more to come. There's also missions on Mars and the moon as well.
Well, China has a full-featured space program. They're trying to do, they've done some significant things on the moon. They've landed the first spacecraft of any type by anybody on the far side of the moon. And just recently, some of the rocks that they studied there and brought back showed that there may have been volcanic activity on the moon far more recent than was previously thought. That's a big deal, and you only can learn this by going there and getting the rocks and looking at them. But in terms of Mars, they've got a rover. Their first landing on Mars, a planet that's very difficult to land on, went perfectly well. The rover did its thing. Now it's on an extended mission, and we have a big space station growing in orbit. So again, China has one of everything so far.
A lot of preparation into this. Keith Cowing, stay with us. We'll keep checking back with you, especially as we get more information and hopefully some video of what is happening above us.
Will do.
Thank you so much. Half a year in space will be a record for China. How do the taikonauts prepare for that? We spoke to the person who designed the training course.
6 months is long for space flight. It's very demanding on the astronauts' physical and mental health, knowledge and skills, ability to self-adjust and deal with emergencies. This challenge is unprecedented for us. In response to this challenge, based on the original plan, we strengthened their physical training, including core strength and upper body strength training. Both male and female astronauts must have back and chest tolerance with 8 times their own weight. They have also enhanced their abilities to deal with the psychological challenge. and we train the crew for what they would need to do during the 6 months. They will stay in a more complex space station. They have more tasks to perform and will spend longer time to maintain their living environment. They also need to master more space station technology, perform simulated spacewalks, operate a robotic arm, and conduct new experiments. We also took into account the increased probability of something going wrong during a 6-month flight. For example, the system may malfunction, people may get sick. We strengthened their training of emergency response and medical self-rescue.
Let's go back to Keith Cowing. He's a retired rocket scientist and editor of spaceref.com. So let's talk about the training. I mean, I know that we just saw Shenzhou-13 return back to Earth more recently. This one went right back up. There are things happening to get ready for the next mission, but let's talk about what the current crew had to do for this particular mission.
Well, there's something you said that you may not really get the importance of, but usually China would launch one flight and then it'd be a year or so before another. We've had two in very quick succession. So it's not just the crew that needs to do a lot of training, it's the thousands of people on the ground that have to put the rockets together to launch them and operate them. So it may look like there's only 3 or 4 people doing a lot of work, but there's a whole bunch of people behind them. But in terms of what this crew had to do, clearly there's an extra vehicular activity or a spacewalk or an EVA, and that requires a lot of training in a large pool where they have a large replica of the space station. But again, this is a big spacecraft. It's the size of a school bus, and everything on the wall is one experiment or one piece of hardware that needs to be checked from time to time. So there's a lot of just learning what each of these things was, what button to push, and how to control it, what happens when it goes wrong, when it goes right, and things like that. So it's a lot of, but again, it usually ends up being a lot of checklists is what it really is. Going into space is checking a lot of boxes.
Keith, are we talking about several months, a year? Some astronauts, taikonauts spend a lot of their, we're talking years, most of the career preparing for something like this.
Yeah, there's different things that you can learn right away and other things that, again, I make the joke about the checklist, but there is a lot of familiarity you need to have with the spacecraft as to how it works, and not just what it does when it's working fine, but what happens if things go wrong, if there's a fire, and you have to be able to respond to those things very quickly without thinking, and everybody needs to know what they're doing and what they're supposed to do regardless of where they are. But in addition to that, there's just, the day-to-day routine, which, sometimes the scientists on the ground can say, hey, we got a different result than we expected. Can you change this and that? And so you also have to learn how to be flexible. And oftentimes you've got people talking into your ear from different parts of the Earth and so forth. You kind of have to multiplex. That's kind of the trick here. And you also have to learn sometimes how to ignore the people on the ground. When you know what you're doing there and there's other people saying, no, do it this way, sometimes your way is the best because you're there. So that only comes from actually being there, and that's what they're going to be learning in the next 90 days is how to really work in space as opposed to how to train for it.
We understand 2 veterans, 1 newcomer on this team. Keith Cowing, stay with us. We'll keep checking back with you as we go on. Thank you. China's space ambitions have developed rapidly, so how did China embark on manned space exploration? And what is its blueprint? Let's take a look.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
In 1969, Neil Armstrong delivered his famous words from the moon. By this time, China had already been working on its first manned spacecraft research for 2 years. Chen Shui-sun, the father of China's rocketry program, dared to dream big. Before China's first spacecraft was born, it had a significant name, Shuhuang, First Light of Dawn. The Chinese plan was to put 2 astronauts in space within 2 years. Due to a social turbulent era, China could not afford to undertake such a massive project. China's first manned space project was halted after 8 years. The turning point was in September 21st, 1992, after a 17-year break. China decided to restart its manned space program and set a clear and ambitious path. Named after the date, Project 921 was born. China began building its new crewed spacecraft. It was based on Changping's satellite technology, but with a new name, Shenzhou. 4 Shenzhou craft cleared all technical obstacles soon after. But now, the big question: who's going to be China's first man in space? In 1998, 14 candidates were selected from among China's best pilots. China aimed to launch its first manned mission in 2003. At 9 a.m. October 15, as the steel tower released the launch vehicle, the nation held its breath. History was made. Young Li Wei became a legend, the first Chinese person in space. China joined ranks of the Soviet Union and the United States. 2 years later, Shenzhou-6 carried another 2 astronauts into space. China had accomplished the first step of the 921 project. The next step was EVA and a space lab. A month after the end of the Beijing Olympics, 2 astronauts did the first spacewalk in 2008. In 2017, the first cargo spacecraft, Tiangong-1, docked with Tiangong 2 3 times. China's manned space program completed its second step. Then began the third step, building the space station. It's called Tiangong, or Heavenly Palace. It consists of a core module and 2 experimental modules, and can dock with manned spacecraft and cargo ships. The core module blasted off in April 2021. 2 months later, 3 astronauts on board Shenzhou-13 entered space. They opened the hatch and began their 3 months in a new home. China's space station will be completed in 2022. After 3 decades, over 10,000 days, China can proudly say it has a home in space.
And of course, here we are with the Shenzhou-13. Let's turn back to Keith Cowie. He joins us from our Washington newsroom. And Keith, we are still working to get this video of the docking taking place. It took place just a few moments ago, but hoping to get that on the air. Just some of your other thoughts as we wait for that to happen.
Well, again, I think I mentioned before that it's great to see that instead of launching every couple of years, China's now able to launch these missions, not only the modules, but the crews, and in short succession. And here in the States, we call it the cadence of launch. And that's kind of important because as you build more complicated spacecraft and have more missions, it's getting the ability to launch these things one after another is sometimes harder than just like launching one every year or 2 or 3. So that's, to me, as a space geek, is something that's very important. And also just looking at the way that the spacecraft is being put together. If you look inside of it, as somebody who myself helped design the International Space Station, it's very familiar. And there's a very simple reason for that, and that is there's sort of a group of international standards for how you build hardware. It's sort of like, I can plug my iPhone into a battery charger in some parts of the world with 240 or 110. But there's standard ways of doing that, and that's being used in space. Now, the benefit of that is, although sometimes it's difficult for the U.S. and China to cooperate, there are a lot of nations on the International Space Station that are able to work directly with China. So what you're going to see is conceivably research that can be done where the researcher says, I need to, build this thing to go into space. And they say, well, let's say I can go to the International Space Station, or I can go to China's space station, or I can go to a private space station, or all of them. And it's a flexibility that just comes with, sort of an international standard. And it's sort of like, if you can trade with a nation on Earth, you should be able to work with them in space. And that's what's happening.
Well, and a quick reminder that the larger picture is this is just one piece of the bigger goal of constructing this space station. So this will take quite a while. I mean, we'll see more missions. Once this is over, another one will go up. Talk to us about the larger picture. I know you talked about collaborating in space, but the actual structure itself and what that will accomplish.
Well, the video that was shown just a moment ago does illustrate how you put one piece up and then another, and then you add another, and then as you add pieces, you have to reorient them to point in a different direction, and there's your video. And, that's complicated, and it's something that you can watch others do, but you learn by doing. And every time you do this, every time a spacecraft arrives or leaves, you're better at this. And so while you see 3 large modules on the space station, you also see a docking ball which has unused docking ports. So it's not inconceivable that this space station could get much bigger. And again, as politics on Earth tend to drive things in space, but it is not inconceivable that a spacecraft that has docked with the International Space Station could not go at some point to the Chinese space station or vice versa, or again, that it becomes a regular thing that we send people in hardware to one space station and then, oh, well, we're going to go to the other one. And it isn't an issue of whether they can dock mechanically, it's whether it makes sense politically or scientifically. So that's we're there now. We can actually do this. The only reason why we don't see everybody visiting everybody's space station is politics, not rocket science.
Well, we want to get this video right on the air. It just came in, the video of the docking. So, Keith, let's take a look here. This, let's just say at first, this is the view from the control room in China. This is what they are looking at. So, can you explain what we're seeing here?
Well, what you see is the larger space. Well, a moment ago you saw the space station itself, and then you saw the Shenzhou-13 coming up. And these spacecraft, although they look like they're close together, technically they're in slightly different orbits. So you have to, this is sort of like two ships at sea trying to, come close enough so somebody could jump from one to the other. But in this case, they're docking together. And so you want to take your time doing this, and as you can see with one of these cameras, it's a camera right through the docking adapter looking right at the space station. And so that's pretty much a bird's eye view of what it's like as the docking happens. And then you can watch and you'll see these latches come in to grab the space station and the Shenzhou and bring them closer together. And so a lot of this is just, these cameras are there for the engineers, not for us, but we're looking over their shoulders.
Right, we understand this took place about 17 minutes ago, right at the top of the hour, we were getting word that this was taking place. So fast forward to current time, where about are they in this process, and how much longer do we see something happen where we see the taikonauts come aboard?
Well, this is sort of like watching paint dry when a spacecraft comes in. You've been watching, Soyuz and American spacecraft do this for decades. China's, they're not going to make docking any more interesting. Let's just put it that way. And there's a lot of processes you have to go through to, again, as I mentioned before, make sure that the air is safe inside your spacecraft and inside of the space station, and that everything's aligned perfectly, that they can talk to people on the ground, and the ground people can see what's going on. So again, as exciting as space travel can be, there's a lot of, checking off the list and getting okays from people. And that's what they're going to be doing probably for the next hour, hour and a half. And since this is only the second time that they've really docked with this space station, I bet you there's a bunch of people on the ground that have given the taikonauts a bunch of other things to do just to make triply sure that they've got this thing working out properly. And of course, this is the second time they're going to a different docking port. So they've never docked at this port on the space station before.
Right.
So I'll guarantee you they're looking out the window, taking pictures, of making everything they possibly can in terms of measurements and recordings so that the folks back on Earth can say, okay, yeah, it looks good to us.
So we're hearing a couple hours, 2 to 3 hours possibly before that docking is complete. Silly question for you as an average person. Will we see them come through this port? I mean, will we see the astronauts actually move through, or do you think that's something we'll see on the other end?
God, I hope so. It's pretty straightforward. Once you're opening the hatches, it's like you're decided to come in. And, I've seen earlier footage of the previous mission, and yeah, that's sort of the whole point of going is to say, hey, we're here. So I would expect that to be the case. And as some of the video you've been showing here, they had a shot that showed a little circular target with an X. That's one of the docking targets that, as the camera comes in, it sort of focuses in on that, and that's how they steer the spacecraft in perfectly. But yeah, I would be very surprised if you didn't see 3 smiling faces waving.
I think that's what we're all waiting for.
Yeah.
We have new video of China's Shenzhou-13 docking with the Tiangong space station. You're taking a look at this new video here just into our newsroom. Now, this maneuver was more challenging than the last mission, Shenzhou-12. The capsule had to pivot to a different docking port this time. The Shenzhou-12 crew practiced the maneuver before returning to Earth, and now this new crew will enter the space station in just a few hours from now, maybe 2 to 3 hours. They will stay aboard 6 months, China's longest crewed mission. And their main objectives, spacewalks and working with the station's robotic arms. They'll also conduct medicine and physics experiments. China's 6-month missions are designed to construct and test the Tiangong space station complex. 2 more space station modules are scheduled for launch next year. Let's turn back to Keith Cowing, who's been standing by this entire time. Keith, I want to get your thoughts on this new video that we're seeing.
Well, you're seeing it's the Chinese version of what we've seen with other space stations, and that is you see the black and white image, and then you see these dotted lines and so forth, and you see a little target, and you can tell just by looking at the image that this is also how the system, the automated system and the piloted system, find the space station and then guide in, and you see it goes very slowly. That's not an artifact. That's how long it takes to do this very, complicated endeavor here. And you'll see on the other screen there, you see some lights. You're seeing a view from the spacecraft from Shenzhou to the space station on the left, and from the space station to Shenzhou on the right. See, yeah, there you go. You got another thing here with the docking target. This is a classic way of having 2 spacecraft do that intricate dance in space and then come very close. And again, this is sort of like a couple of elephants dancing. I mean, these are big things up in space, and even though they're weightless, they do tend to want to do their own thing unless you guide them very carefully. And there's a beautiful shot there, yeah, of Shenzhou coming in. That is just beautiful.
I'm just the average person, Keith, but I do want to get some context. When we're looking at these pictures, they're so great, but who do they help? Who is watching this? Is this helping the actual docking take place? I mean, is this helping the folks on the ground, the engineers, or what are they doing with this video?
Well, whoever edited these up did a perfect job because it shows all of that. In essence, these cameras, they have 2 purposes. Obviously, you and I are looking at this, and it was released as soon as they could get it out. But more importantly, this is for the people on the ground to watch the whole process. This is a new system, so they really want to make sure they're looking at everything, every little piece there, to make sure that it's doing what it's supposed to do. And it also lets you go back later and play this back at slow speed, like what they're showing in here right now. How the approach happens, what happens when the docking probe hits, and how it connects and so forth, how it bounces a little bit. That's all important to the engineers to make sure that they understand how the system is working and working properly. And that, to me, looked like a classic docking. From my practice eye, I saw nothing but 2 spaceships doing what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, that was a great shot there when they just lined up and locked in. It looked like it locked in together.
Yep.
Now we're looking at this video, which I'm not sure what this is, but if you have any insight into what we're seeing here, would love to hear it.
Well, now you're seeing, there was a beautiful shot there from the station showing the dock Shenzhou, and I guess if this is a live shot on the left-hand side, they're in there going through their checklists for the people on the ground. Again, this is the bane of spaceflight, is checklists and so forth. And then you see in the control room on the right hand, obviously they're monitoring the systems, but in the upper right-hand corner, you now see the configuration of the main module and the service module and the Shenzhou-13 dock to it. So, again, this is sort of your classic how you watch a space station do its thing. And there's a nice shot of what the configuration looks like now. And of course, as the additional 2 modules are launched and then another cargo spacecraft, this is going to become something akin to the size of Russia's original Mir space station. So this is a really significant piece of hardware.
We'll continue to get video coming in throughout the evening, but what do you hope we'll see next?
Well, we just saw what I was hoping to either see a sunrise or a sunset. It looks like we're seeing, yeah, it looks like a sunrise to me. That's kind of what, and as a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure the crew is looking out the window at this. It looks pretty spectacular. That's a bit of why you go up, in these space flights to begin with, is to be there. And that's what they're probably doing right now.
Hopefully they'll get a chance between all of those checks you mentioned to enjoy their time and the views from space. We understand that one of the crew members, this is his first mission in space. The other 2 have been there before, so quite an experience for that person.
Well, I bet you he's doing what we're probably going to call a William Shatner now, which is your face up against the window, not caring about the floating around, just looking down at the beautiful Earth below. So I guarantee you, as much as they're trained to do that, they have to go do this every now and then.
When does the business of actually starting the experiments begins? I know that you mentioned that it takes some time to get everything established, make sure everything's in working order, get into the space station. But when do the experiments begin?
I wouldn't be surprised if they're actually doing something in the cabin right now where they would take a little probe out and take an air sample for the engineers back home, and as soon as they enter the space station, I'd be really surprised if they didn't do a quick grab, as we would call it, a quick grab of the air just to see what the air was like in the space station after having been up there without people in it for a while. And they'll bring that back to Earth, and they'll be able to see if there's any microbes in there that are unexpected, any gases that have leaked out, and so forth. And that's probably what they'll be doing initially, is just to do the initial check to make sure that, it's sniff checks is what they would call it, to make sure that everything is safe up there. And then they may actually swab the surface a little bit to get some microbiology samples, again, before they add to the microbiology, but also to see what might have been left behind by the previous crew. And so in terms of the real sciencey stuff where the racks are coming down and all the lights are blinking, that will probably be 3 days from now, once they're making sure that everything works. And at some point soon, they're actually going to have to go outside and connect a few cables to get the spacecraft fully integration, the new module fully integrated with the space station.
You know, we're getting these amazing shots, and the one thing that I've noticed over recent years as we've seen these missions go up and down is the amount of video, right? I mean, let's talk about technology. Nowadays, you can see everything happening in real time, right? I mean, we're seeing this docking happening. Can you talk to us about all the cameras and the audio? I mean, they're conducting classes, not just experiments, but we really are living what they're going through up there.
Well, it's sort of like you can put a camera in there, so why not? And I thought one of the most interesting things and China did both of these, was as its mission was going to Mars, they had the main spacecraft, but they had these little smaller CubeSats that they shot off, and then they turned around and took a picture of the spacecraft. It had two purposes. One was obviously to look to make sure that the spacecraft was okay, but hey, it's kind of cool to look at too. And then when the rover landed on Mars, it left the little camera on the surface and drove away, and the camera was looking up again to look at the underside of the rover, but it was a cool picture. So, you know, everything you do up there has more than one purpose. Again, the cameras that you look through as you're coming in, that's there to, help the engineers and the operators know that everything's going well, but it's not lost on people that you're looking over. Hundreds of millions of people are watching this stuff now, as you and I are seeing it for the first time. And there's, we're all paying for this in one way or another. So it's a way of engaging everybody and understanding that while maybe only a few people can go up there, we can all watch and participate in this, amazing stuff that is being done in space.
Very quickly, Keith, just a few more seconds, and then we're going to move on. Again, we just want to let everyone know that about half an hour ago, the Shenzhou-13 docked to the space station in space, so that is still happening as we speak. Any final thoughts as we wait for the next step to happen?
Well, again, you're going to see three happy people. They may try not to smile too much, but they will. And I think it's important to remember that, the more people, the more nations, the more companies that begin to take the opportunity to build space stations and space platforms, the more you just have a global involvement in the exploration and utilization of this amazing frontier. But also, as you and I have chatted more than once, usually when you see a country like the U.S. and Russia, if you've watched the news lately, we tend to argue about things, and the same thing with China. But, if you look at the International Space Station, 20 years, at most they've had a little snarky back and forth. We've had 20 years of perfect collaboration between not just the U.S. and Russia, but China, Japan and Russia and Europe and Argentina and a whole bunch of other countries. So there's something about how we do things in space, as humans in space, that allows us to collaborate beyond earthly problems, and maybe how we do things in space should teach us a little bit more about how we should be doing things back on Earth.
Ah, that's a great thought.